Welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. So over the last few weeks I've had a few comments about sort of potatoes and how to store them and what's the best thing to do, not only through the channel but also through my Twitter account and stuff like that. And also I've had people asking me as well on the plot how to store potatoes. And there's more than one way of doing it, to be honest with you, and it depends on what your circumstances are. Now I tend to use a combination of two ways, and what I'll explain the different ways you can do it, and then I can sort of explain why I do what I do. So the first one is obviously to dig them all up, and when you're digging your potatoes up, obviously what you want to do is dig them up without damaging them. And so basically you always put your fork, sort of well away from the actual plant, and start to dig in, get the potatoes out. Always use a fork to do it, and dig your potatoes out, and then get all the soil off from the potatoes the best you can. If it has been raining, the best thing to do is to get the potatoes out and then put them on top of the ground, and then leave them there for an hour or so to dry out, and then you'll be able to brush the soil off. As soon as you've done that, put them in a shed or wherever just to dry out. So what you want to do, this is obviously if you're storing them. If you use them straight away, you don't need to do this. But if you're storing them, what you want to do is dry the potato out as much as you possibly can do, because it's the moisture on the potato from the soil being on there, which is going to cause you problems for storing. So you want to get the potatoes as dry as possible. It's exactly like any other seed. You want to get all the moisture out as much as possible, because that's what's going to cause the fungal problems if you're storing them. As soon as you've dried your potatoes out, what you most certainly want to do is keep them dry and keep them in the dark, because what you don't want to do with potatoes, if you get any sunlight, you get a reaction, they start to turn green. If they turn green, you can't eat them, they're no good. So what you want to do is most certainly get them out, get them into your shed, get them in the dark, but get them in a ventilated area. Make sure they're absolutely bone dry as you can possibly get them. Get all the soil off, because that's what's going to hold the moisture on there. As soon as your potatoes is dry, check them again, make sure you've got no slugs in there, no blight if you've had any blight on the plants. There's no rot, and most certainly check that you haven't put your fork through them or anything like that, or there's no damage or any marks on the potatoes. If they meet all of that criteria, so they're not damaged, there's no signs of blight or any disease on them. If the skin's a little bit scabby because you've had lime in the ground, don't worry about that. That's perfectly fine. And make sure that they're not obviously green. As soon as you've done that, what you can do then is put them into paper sacks. Don't put them in plastic bags or anything like that, because they'll sweat in there. What you want to do is put them in paper sacks, and then put them in the darkest, coolest place you can find. The ideal place is a stone-built garage, a brick-built garage, because in there it's cold, it's dark, and and what you want to do is put the bag on the concrete floor, because obviously the floor is going to be the coolest, and that's going to keep your potatoes cool. So as soon as they're in the bag, you need to keep them nice and cool, dry and in the dark, and then they'll store quite nicely there. If the temperature starts to rise, you can get the potatoes started to chit. As soon as they start to chit, they think it's the next season they're going to start to grow, so that they're not going to keep that way. So most certainly what you want to do is trick the potatoes into thinking it's winter, it's not spring yet. So you keep them in the dark so they think they're underground. You keep them dry, and you keep them cool, as cool as you possibly can do without them freezing. Obviously, you need to keep them in a sort of frost-free place, because obviously the frost can also damage them as well. So that's the first method: digging them up and storing them in bags. The second method is to dig them up and to basically put them in a potato bed. And what you do is you dig a hole in the ground, and then put all the potatoes in sort of one place. Just pile them up inside a ditch in the ground, and then put over the top some more dirt to keep them in the dark. And what you're doing there is you're keeping them cold, you're keeping them in the dark, and also they're in the ground, so they're going to be okay. That's like an old style Victorian way of storing them, to be honest with you. What you can do is store them in sand, which is exactly the same thing. So what you do is you get a box or a tub or wherever, and then what you do is you put some sand in the bucket. You put your potatoes in the bucket, like a big sort of tub like this. You put your potatoes in there, and then you put some sand over the top of them again. Again, what this is doing is the sand, obviously dry sand, kiln dry sand. The sand will keep them dry and in the dark. And obviously because there's a reasonably large thermal mass there, it'll keep them cool as well. Again, you need to put that in a dry place that's cold, like a garage or something like that. But in all honesty, you're better off putting them in sacks than doing that. And the next method of doing it is just to leave them in the ground. There's no reason why you can't leave potatoes in the ground, and that's one of the methods that I use. So what I would tend to do, you can most certainly leave potatoes in the ground that have grown this year until kind of January, February next year. And they'll be perfectly good in the ground. Things you need to be concerned about is if you've got slugs in your ground that will obviously attack the potatoes. That's one reason to take them out of the ground. If you've had any blight on your plants and it has been a reasonably severe attack, I would recommend that you take them out of the ground, because the longer they're in the ground, the more susceptible they are to getting blight. So if you have got potatoes that the plants have had blight, even if you're taking the tops off, I would advise you take them out of the ground, to be honest with you. Dependent on how much blight you've had, you may want to chance your arm and leave some in. I've done that in past years, and that's been alright. But what I normally do is I normally dig up about 5 or 6 rows of potatoes and bag them up, put them in the shed, and then what I typically do is the other sort of 5 or 6 rows that I've got in there, I'll typically leave them in the ground and dig them up as and when I need them. And then what I do is, if the weather's nice and dry, I'll come up and dig them out the ground and use them. Or what I'll do is, if it's been wet and damp and stuff like that, what I'll do, and cold or the ground's frozen, what I'll typically do is then use them out of the bag. So that's typically how I manage my potatoes. Different ways suit different people, but most certainly if you've got slugs in the ground or if you've had blight, I would probably advise you may be better off digging them out of the ground now. As I say, leave them on top of the ground. A nice sunny day today. A day like today is ideal. We're on the 19th of September today, so this is an ideal day to do it. It's the ground's reasonably dry. It's a nice sunny day, and there's a bit of a breeze. What you can do is dig them out of the ground, and then as soon as you've got the potatoes at the ground, just put the potatoes on top of the ground. So what I would do is, as you're digging them out, put them on the ground next to on top of the ground where you just dug the last plant out. And so what you'll end up with is like a row of potatoes on top of the ground, and then leave them there for an hour or so just to dry out. Go back over, get all the dirt off as best you can with your hands, and don't wash them. Just rub it off with your hands. If there's a bit of dirt on there, that's not going to cause a problem. But what you don't want to do is wash the potatoes, because when you wash them, you can cause sort of scratches in the surface, and then that's another way for fungus to grow. So try not to damage the skin of the potato, which is quite thin. Leave them on the top of the ground to dry, and then after an hour or so, go back, sort of clean them up. Don't throw them in the bag. Place them in the bag, because what you don't want to do is bruise them. And then obviously sort of treat them gently. Don't you don't want to bruise the potato. And then as soon as they're in the sack, and then just tie the sack up, put them in the shed to dry, and then put them in the shed to store them. What I would suggest you do is, what I tend to do is put them out to dry in the shed. What I typically do is put them on the floor, and just pile them up on the floor, or have them in buckets or something like that. Not too deep, just 2 or 3 deep. And then in a couple of weeks' time, what you can do is check them again to see if there's any slug damage or any blight or rot or anything like that. Obviously, then you don't want to put them in the sack. If you've got one potato that's going bad in a sack, it'll send the rest of the the neighbouring ones in the sack bad as well. So it's worthwhile to, if you do sack them up, to go back in a couple of weeks' time, maybe a month or so's time, and just take the potatoes and decant them out of one sack into another, just to make sure that you've not got any bad ones in there. And obviously, if there are any, discard those and just put the good ones in the sack. So that's the best advice I can give you for storing potatoes. Okay, so I'm going to dig some potatoes out now, and
obviously this is a really good time for you to get any weeds out the ground as well. So if you're like me and you've had a few weeds growing over your potato patch, it's well worthwhile you getting them out of the way now. And what I typically do is just go over where I'm about to dig. So if there's any seeds on the weeds, obviously you're not disturbing them too much. But right, so there's the actual row of potatoes there. And so what you want to do is you want to come back about a foot away from the plant. So there's the plant there. I've come back about a foot or so. So it's basically in the trough of where, sort of between the rows. And what you want to do is get the fork in as far as you possibly can, and sort of slowly lift them up. And as you can see, there's the first potato at the top. So as they're coming out, you can see there's two good sized potatoes. I'm just putting them on the side there to dry. So there's another good sized potato. So they're good for baking. And obviously by coming that far back, what you're doing is you're not sort of running the chance of putting the fork in the ground. And as soon as you've got out the potatoes, dig forward a little bit, just in case there's a potato slightly to the left of the row. So even though that plant only had 4 potatoes coming off, then they're pretty good size. So again, I'm just coming back. Now this variety, if you've not seen before, I always go kestrel, and you can always tell kestrel because they've got like a pink tinge to them, typically around where the eyes are going to come from next year. But there's 3 good potatoes. There's another good potato. So these are all good for baking, really. There's 3 more. So far out of 2 plants, I've got. Well, you can't see them, they're off the camera. I've got 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sort of baking sized potatoes. Again, I'm just going to go in here. There are some smaller ones, kind of that kind of size, but they're predominantly sort of, I don't know, baking size potatoes. That one's perhaps a little bit smaller than baking size. And as I say, this is a really good time to clean your soil up as well. I mean, if you've ever got soil that's a bit rough, putting potatoes in is really going to clean the soil up, because you're double digging it. You really are getting all the weeds and stuff out. So it's a good idea to, whilst you're here, get as many of the weeds out as you possibly can do. So now this plant here, and then I'll just dig this up. This has actually got 1 potato that's been popping out, so there's a good one. As you can see, that potato is nice and clean, and there's no greenness on it, so that's a really good potato. However, this potato here has seen a little bit of sunlight, so as you can see it's gone green there. Now you can potentially cut that bit off and use that. That will be perfectly fine to use, but most certainly this green bit, you don't want to eat that, so most certainly cut that off if you get any potatoes like that. There's another one here just like it, so that bit's obviously seen a bit of daylight. That end's okay, so you can most certainly cut that off and do some baking potatoes, or roast potatoes with that, or boil them or chip them or whatever. But the green bit, cut that off and get it out of the way. So again, another good potato. There's plenty of little ones on this one. So these smaller ones, even if you're not going to eat those, these are nice. These are nice if you roast them. If you just clean them up with a scrubbing brush, like a nail brush, scrub them, and then if you boil them for about 10 minutes, and then in a reasonably large saucepan, if you put some garlic and rosemary, and then just basically put them in there. As soon as they're starting to go soft in the drain them, and then put them in some oil with garlic and rosemary, and then just whiz them around that pan for a couple of minutes. Put them on a baking tray and roast them. They're absolutely superb. These ones are obviously sort of middle-sized sort of potatoes. So I think there might be a few more there, so I'm just going to always remember to dig deep with potatoes, because you can get some that's a bit further down. I have broken forks in the past doing this, so when you pull the soil up, what I suggest you do is get it in the ground like that, as far as down, so I'll push that all the way into the ground, and then slowly lift the ground up. So there's a nice sized potato. There's possibly only one on that one. Right, so on here we got this one, which unfortunately has got a bit of green on there, but you could cut that off and use the rest of it. And these ones aren't too bad. As I say, that one's gone green as well. I'd possibly ditch that one altogether, to be honest. But what you want to do is get the soil off with your hands like that, and then just put them on the side for it to dry. If you get any splits in the potatoes like that, I don't know if you can see that split, that's when you've had a dry period and then you've had some rain, and the potato expands quickly and tends to split. Perfectly okay to eat and store, but obviously you'd want to cut that off when you're preparing it. So I think that was basically 5 plants. Just making sure I've got no more here. Okay, so I'll just show you on the camera. So they're the potatoes there. So I'll leave them on the ground to dry for half an hour or so to an hour, and then I'll put them in the bucket, and then I'll put them in the shed for a bit. And then as soon as they've dried out properly, I'll sack them up.
Okay, so when you've picked your or sort of dug your potatoes up, obviously there's going to be sort of different in size. And so we're going to have potatoes sort of as big as that. Now that's really not really much good for anything. So what I would suggest you do with that, as I was explaining earlier on, is any potatoes you've got like that, just scrub them clean, and then part boil them. So boil them for about 10 minutes or so. As soon as you've boiled them, so they're starting to go soft, what you can do is just mix up in some oil, garlic and rosemary. Put that in a wok, get it nice and hot. Put the potatoes in there, just whiz them around for a couple of minutes, put them on a baking tray, and then roast them for about half an hour or so on about 160, 180 in the oven, and they come out really nice. Obviously potatoes kind of that size are great for roasting. Potatoes sort of, shall we say that size, or a bit smaller, you know, just cut them up for normal use. And then potatoes that are kind of that big, about the size of a golf ball or slightly smaller. Now they're, unfortunately I haven't got any neither to the ideal size, but potatoes kind of like that, those are ideal for your seed potatoes for next year. Now there's a reasonable amount of controversy about this, because you know a lot of sort of potato sellers and stuff like that always recommend that you use you know, seed potatoes bought in a shop because of one reason or another. I disagree. I've been doing this now for years. I've been doing it for 7 or 8 years, and I've only ever bought one lot of kestrel potatoes. I used to grow King Edwards and other varieties. I always used to grow Sharp Expresses and Early, and I used to grow King Edwards as well. And I used to get quite a lot of slug damage, which is why I only grow kestrel now. And what I find with kestrel is you do tend to get the odd one that's got a little bit of slug damage, but by and large, you know, the majority of them are you know, left well alone, because I don't really like to use chemicals on the ground to control the slugs and that. But what I always do is I save potatoes that size in exactly the same way, dry them out. Obviously these are a little bit wet because they've still got the soil on, but get all the soil off as best you can, dry them out, and then put them in a sack or whatever over winter, and then come the spring put them out onto your egg trays to chit, and I use them for the seed potatoes. I've been doing that, as I say, for 8 years or so, and I've never had a problem. So save ones that size for your seed potatoes. Anything smaller than that, cook them up like I suggest, you know, roast them. Or you can just boil them and just have them that way if you wish. The middle-sized ones, I always use them for, you know, do mashed potato, or you can do chips or whatever. And then the larger ones, obviously the ones that are kind of that size, are best for roasting. So what I always do is when I'm sorting them out into the sacks, I always put all the big ones for like Jackie potatoes into one sack. The middle-sized ones, I'll put them in another sack, and then the ones that are sort of really small, I typically use them straight away. And then the ones that are kind of golf ball size or slightly bigger, I use them for the seed potatoes next year. So I'll put them into a sack up the back of the shed, and then early on next spring, sort of February, March time, I'll get them out to put them out onto the egg trays to chip them. So that's the best way to do your potatoes. So that's what I call a potato. It's got to be probably best part of a kilo in weight, I'd say. So that's a kestrel, possibly the largest one I'm going to get this year. But as you can see, it's about 7 inches long, and probably about 4 inches wide at the 5 inches wide at the widest. But nice sized potato. Okay, the next one comes from Nigel over in Wolverhampton, Nigel Muddy Boots, and he was saying because of all the seasonal disruption that we've had this year, you know, with the damp, hot days, cold nights, damp nights, rain, dry periods and all the rest of it. We've had some quite unusual weather in the UK this year, and the plants most certainly have suffered for it. Some plants have thrived, the beans have been okay, the brassicas have most certainly enjoyed it, so they've done well, but other crops haven't done so well. I think the potatoes haven't done as well as they perhaps could have done. Most certainly the sweet potatoes and things like that have suffered, and most certainly the strawberries were late. The tomatoes haven't done particularly well this year. They've done pretty well, but they haven't done perhaps as well as they could have done. And because of this strange sort of behaviour that we're having, most certainly in the spring, where we were trying to germinate stuff like peas, beans and stuff like that, I know a lot of you have problems with that. You know, it has been a funny year this year, to you know, for various reasons. But Nigel was saying we hope we get a better year next year, and I completely agree. I hope we have a more standardised UK weather system next year. But yes, I'm absolutely with you there, Nigel. The next one comes from Ben Williams, and he was talking about the wasps. Now I put a little clip in a couple of weeks ago with regards to the sunflowers down the bottom, and I've never known this before, but I've grown sunflowers on here for the past sort of 11-12 years. Never had a problem before, but what the wasps have done this year is they've attacked one of the sunflowers at the bottom, and they've basically stripped the bark off the sunflower, and because of it they've killed the sunflower, unfortunately, because most of the sap will rise through there. I don't know if you've ever cut a sunflower stalk off, you'll see the middle bit's quite sort of like fibre. What's the word? It looks a bit like candy floss on the inside, where the outside is the sort of the strength, where that's the fibrous stuff, and obviously most of the sap and stuff like that to feed the plant is going to be going up the you know, sort of the outside of it, if you like. And unfortunately, the wasps have eaten straight the way through that, and they've sucked all the sap out of the sunflower. Unfortunately, they've killed one of them. Now I've not known that before, and Ben was saying he's seen that on trees before, where wasps have been attacking trees. And in a lot of countries you'll see on the bottom of trees, what they'll do is they'll paint the bottom of the trunk of the tree with some like white paint, which is specific white paint to stop insects from both climbing up the tree but also from attacking the bottom of the tree, because that's typically where all the sap is. So obviously we don't typically use that in the UK, but yeah, the wasps have had a right go at the sunflowers this year, which is unusual. But yeah, as I say, out of all the sunflowers, they've only really attacked the one. So, but whilst I was showing you the video the other day, they were going up. You know, these same wasps are going all over the other sunflowers, and they were trying to sort of get sap off those as well. So they have been a bit of a nuisance this year, to be honest with the wasps. So, the next comment comes from Don, from Don's Allotment, and Don was asking me how I do the onions, and he was saying, do I put seeds in or do I put sets in? Now, to be honest with you, Don, what I normally do is just buy a load of sets. I normally put in about 500 onions or so, and what I do is I just buy sort of 2 or 3, 4 bags of onion sets and put them in, and I find that to be really successful. This year I did actually try growing some from seed, and these were bought as sort of seedlings, so they look like you know, they were kind of about that high when I got them. and they were like looked like leeks, you know, like pieces of grass. And I put those in. They haven't been very successful. In fact, out of the row that I put in, actually only one of them came to anything, to be honest with you. So as I say, I did try that this year. I didn't put a video out on it because I wasn't quite sure how it was going to turn out. But I think most certainly from now on, I'll stick to the sets, if you like. But what I might try next year is you can get some giant onion seeds. And a friend of mine has got some of these seeds and said, you know, do I want any for next year? So I will probably give that a go. But that was just for an experiment kind of thing. But most certainly the majority of the onions I'll do like I normally do, and that'll be from sets. And I always grow, the one I always go for, which I've always had success with, is Stuttgart Giant. And I find that is a really good onion. And I also would recommend Turbo. And that one's sold by, you can most certainly get those at Wilko's and places like that, which is the cheapest place to get them from. So those are the two, Stuttgart Giant and Turbo are the two varieties I'd most certainly recommend. At least they suit my ground anyway. The next one comes from Tina, and she was saying it's such a shame that we've had blight. Now, I have had a bit more blight in the greenhouse. There's been a couple more tomato plants on here. Obviously this side I've taken out now. And there has been a bit of blight. Obviously I've had it outside on the outside tomatoes, which is a shame. On the inside, I'm not quite sure if it's blight or not, because there's evidence of sort of fungus and that on the stalks. However, the fruits aren't affected, so I'm not sure if it's actually blight in the greenhouse. To be honest with you, most certainly outside it is, but so far all of the fruits have been unaffected in the greenhouse. But if you do get blight, it's not the end of the day. I know a few of you have said you've been taking out your you know, your tomato plants and stuff like that. Now, if the fruits are affected, you know, there's nothing you can do then. But if it's just on the leaves or the stalks and stuff like that, what you can do is cut off the affected part, like the leaves. And to be honest with you, this time of year, what's best to do is take all the leaves off, just leave the tomatoes on. For more than one reason. The first reason is that you get more air circulation within the greenhouse, or even if it's outside, you'll get more air circulation, which will dry the plants out a bit more. And if it's drier, then obviously fungus won't grow. The next thing you can do is you can take the tomatoes off and put them in a windowsill and ripen them that way, because obviously they've already got the goodness from the plant anyway. So if the plant is really badly affected, cut off the tomatoes, put them on a windowsill, and they'll ripen there quite nicely. The other thing you can do is you can spray with Bordeaux mixture, which can be purchased at most garden centres, and that's like a blue sort of copper sulphate based mixture. It's recommended by the Royal Horticultural Society, and that can be sprayed onto the plants and the fruits. Obviously what you need to do with the tomatoes, if you have sprayed with that, is give them a really good wash before you use them. But it doesn't. It just sits on the plant. It doesn't go into the plant, and you can spray them with that. And also, obviously, from a from a fungal point of view, there are other things that you can do. They're not quite as effective. You can spray other things onto the plant, which I've recommended in other episodes of Jim's Allotment, but I would recommend, for most certainly for tomatoes, either cut off the affected parts and get rid of them. Always put them in the bin, don't and try not to disturb them too much. So if you have got a branch that is got covered in blight or whatever, cut it off and try and bring it out without letting that touch anything, because the fungal spores will be sort of going over other healthier parts of the plant or neighbouring plants. So always try and do that. Or take the tomatoes off and just destroy the whole plant and let the tomatoes ripen on the windowsill. Or what you can do is spray with Bordeaux mixture. Those are the basically recommendations I'd give. The next one comes from Tony, from Tony's Allotment. Now he's just changed his channel. That's now UK Here We Grow, and he was saying that the blight resistant, or the blight resistant varieties of tomatoes are most certainly not absolutely free of the possibility of getting blight everywhere. They are susceptible to it, but not as susceptible as other varieties. So that's. But I was a bit disappointed with the ones outside, because I didn't really make the point in the video. I understand where Tony's coming from, but the thing that the point I was making is I've got 2 blight resistant plants in there, and then next to it, both sides, I've got allium plants on one side, and I've got Moneymaker on the other side. And the 2 plants that were blight resistant seem to be the 2 that are most affected by it. So I don't know if that's due to position. I mean, they are literally next to each other, but that was why I was disappointed, because the Moneymaker and the allium tomato plants seem to be less affected by it than the ones that should have been resistant. So I don't know. And the last one comes from Nigel over in Wolverhampton, and he was saying, Muddy Boots, and he was saying about he gets mice eating his sunflower seeds. Now, if you do put your sunflowers in the greenhouse, and you leave your door open and stuff like that, then obviously mice will come in also, because it's it's like sweets to a child basically. They'll be straight in there. So what I would suggest is, if you are drying your sunflowers in your greenhouse, then I would most certainly make sure your door's shut and you haven't got any of the obviously if you've got the windows open at the side, it's unlikely a mouse is going to come up inside there. But obviously if you've got the door open, then obviously if a mouse comes in and sees them, then he'll be straight in there. So Nigel was on about hanging his up in the greenhouse. You can do that, and that would possibly be better for air circulation as well. But obviously if you are drying them out in the greenhouse, then put them in a place where basically mice can't get at them. Okay, the next questions come from Jane Kelly, and she was talking about preserving runner beans, and she was saying the freezer's full and she can't, she's got no room for anything else. Now, the 2 things I would say, Jane, is there are quite a few ways of preserving runner beans. You can pickle them in ginger. You can sort of just pickle them normally, or you can preserve them in salt water. You can obviously, there's obviously the freezing, or you can just eat them straight away. But the other thing, I don't know how many runner beans you've got, obviously, but don't forget, always leave some on the plant for your seeds for next year. I've stopped picking them now, even though there's more coming. I've sort of left them now, and all I'm doing now is picking the ones that I can eat straight away. So when we have Sunday dinner or whatever in the week, I'll come up and pick a handful just for that meal. But all the rest of them now, I'm just leaving them for seed. And what I'll do is I'll show you collecting the seeds later. But rather than sort of going out and buying a load of seeds next year, because bean seeds can be quite expensive now. They can be £3 or £4 a packet. You're much better off saving your seeds, and I've been saving my seeds for forever. The runner bean seeds that I've got were actually originated from my great-grandmother. I've said this before in other videos, but my great-grandmother used to grow runner beans in her garden. She passed the seeds to my father, then he grew runner beans for sort of years whilst I was a child and that. And then I've inherited some seeds from my father, and I've been growing runner beans, and so I've never bought any runner bean seeds. So I don't know what variety of these are, obviously, because they're probably about 50th, 30th, 60th generation since my my grandmother had them. But I mean, it goes back to sort of, well, it'd be more than that actually, because it goes back to pre-Second World War, so that'd be the 1930s, 1940s, and my father would have started growing them in the 1950s, and obviously I'm now growing them 50 years later, so it's most certainly 65 years since my father started to grow them. So I don't know how many generations are, so I'm not quite sure what the variety is, but I know they grow well. And what I always do for collecting seeds, I always leave the longest ones, the biggest ones, the strongest ones if you like, for seed. So when they get to kind of this long, they're the ones that I want to keep for the seed, because I know they're obviously good strong seeds, and also they're in a nice big pod. So the next generation, it's almost like sort of selecting the best seeds, if you were. So if you collect them from the strongest plant, then obviously the likelihood is the plants that grow from those seeds are going to be strong plants as well. So so what I always do is I'll leave the nice big strong beans on the plant, let them develop properly as they would do, and then I'll save those seeds for for growing next year. And I always end up with a bucket full of them, because I always have loads and loads, and I always save loads. So if anybody wants any, let me have your address, and I'll buy, most certainly send you some through the post. The next one comes from Credenza1, and he was talking about the grapevine here. So he was saying the best thing to do. It looks like an infection of basically like a fungal disease that happened last year, and when it actually attacks the plant, you can't actually see it. But he was saying the infection would have happened last year, and even though you can't potentially see it this year, it's affecting the growth of the plant because it damages the little growth shoots, if you like. So basically, what he was saying was the best thing to do is just to cut off the affected branches because they're never going to do any good. So I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to cut out all of the affected branch. I'll grow those two on the tray outside at the moment and bring them into the greenhouse next year and let them grow. But he was saying if you do get that basically the growing tips just get damaged by this infection, and cut them off, and then let the healthy ones grow through, and then they'll they'll sort of grow on the plant. Now, obviously, I showed you a video last week. I'm not quite sure. Even now, I've had another look, to be honest with you. I'm not quite sure if the because these are grafted plants, so you basically got a rootstock from like a wild grapevine, which is obviously quite strong, and then you graft on the variety on top of that. Now, these new shoots, I'm not sure if they're coming from the rootstock or from the graft. Now, it looks like it's coming from the graft, but obviously, if it's from the bottom, it'll be whatever the rootstock was. So what I'll do is I've got nothing to lose really. What I'll do is I'll grow that on, and then I'll see what happens. But I shan't be able to tell if it's worked properly until the thing fruits. So now that the other one's grown all the way along to the end, pretty much. I mean, I'm about a foot off the end now before I take the end off. So next year I'm hoping to get some grapes off that one. This one obviously I'm going to have to start again pretty much from the I've only got stalks on it about that long so far. So I'll take all them off and then grow that on next year, and then in a couple of years time I'll be able to see if it's been successful or not. The last comment comes from Nigel Muddy Boots over in Wolverhampton, and this was a comment with regard to the video I sent out last week on the putting in the concrete posts. Now, he was saying that he's used Postcrete in the past, and he was saying it seemed to be a little bit expensive. Now, you need to shop around, to be honest with you. Postcrete, the Postcrete that I bought was it was £3.98 a bag, and that's so it's basically £4 for a 20 kilo bag. And if you're putting in posts, you need 2 bags per post really. So if you think for every post you put in, you're using about £8 worth of Postcrete, and really in the grand scheme of things, if you consider the posts are about £15 each now, and the panels are, I don't know, sort of 20, £30 each now. In the grand scheme of things, £8 of Postcrete is nothing really. And the way I look at it as well is, you can be mixing concrete, which is hard work, for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, for each post, because you'll typically mix up a batch to do 1 or 2 posts, and then you've got to wait for it to dry, and then there's all the faffing about of waiting a day or so before you can put the panels in and stuff like that. The thing that I like about Postcrete is there's no mixing involved. You just fill the hole the third full with water, pour it in there, and then within 2 minutes the post is set pretty much. Give it another 10 minutes, and it's absolutely rock solid. And from a not mixing point of view, it's well worth the money. From a not having to wait 24 hours for the concrete to go off is most certainly well worth the money. And really, there are other products out there that are similar to it, but in all honesty, I've used Postcrete a number of times, and it is ideal. I have used the sort of other things that are similar to it, and they're not as good, to be honest with you. I've always found that you put the water in the ground, you put it in the hole, you pour it in. 2 minutes later, you can walk away, and the job's a good, good solid base on there, and you can be putting in, in the time that it would take you to put a couple of panels in, you could have put 8 or 9 panels in the same kind of effort. So for me, it's well worth the money at £4 a bag. But as I say, look on the internet. Always check your prices before you go and buy it. Look at people like Wix, B&Q, and other sort of hardware stores and stuff like that. Obviously, there's more than that, but those are the 2 main ones to go for. Obviously, builders merchants as well, and and it's always around. You need to be aiming to get sort of £3.50, £4 a bag, and I always buy in sort of multiple. So the offer that Wix had got on was you know, you buy 5 bags and you get them for basically £3.98. So and I bought 6 bags, so obviously I got them at that price. So shop around. It isn't really expensive, really, for considering for what you get. So for the amount of effort that it takes to put it in, it's well worth the money. So that's the comments for this week. So a real quick update on the chickens. As you can see, they've absolutely massacred the sunflowers. You can see there's not a single seed left in there. So as I say, if you tie it up on the thing like that, just leave it to the chickens, and it gives them something to do as well. You know, you always need to remember that chickens are quite intelligent animals. In fact, there's a reasonable amount of research to say that they're actually more intelligent than dogs. And so you need to keep them sort of occupied as well in the day if you're leaving them in the pen. And you know, eating sunflowers and stuff like that's obviously something that they can do to keep them occupied as well. So as you can see from the remnants of the courgettes, they've gone through them as well. But obviously, if you do have some sunflowers, don't just leave them to the wild birds as well. It's nice to leave some out there for them, but most certainly for your chickens, if you put the heads in like this, just tie them up on the side. As you can see, they've had every single seed out of there. So, I hope this episode has been of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any comments or questions that you've got below, and I'll always get back to you. Thank you for watching Jim's Allotment Garden. I do appreciate all of the support and all of the new subscribers, and well, all of the subscribers. And I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.